Hello everybody. We're going to do chapter 5, which has to do with abnormal pathogens. And I'm not really sure what happened to my introductory lecture on this chapter. It just starts taking over on this particular chapter, so I'm making a new introductory lecture, and this is it. So nursing never gets easier, but you do begin to adapt and get confidence in yourself, so hopefully that will come with time. We are going to be talking about anti-infective drugs, and we're going to discuss all kinds of meds for bacteria, what we would call antibiotics. We're going to talk about anti-tubercular drugs, and then various antifungal agents, anti-parasitic agents. The chapter sort of gets grosser as you go along. So in the textbook, this material is covered on page 64 through 92, kind of a long chapter, which is why I just test over chapter 5 alone. Your ATI chapters 37 through 41, and they split things into categories, like they'll do the penicillins, the macrolides, other types of antibiotics, a class at a time. So make sure you read those 37, 38, 39, 40, and 41. So we're going to talk about various kinds of infections and the complications that somebody can get into when you're dealing with antibiotics. So going through this, a pathogen is an organism that can cause infection. Generally, when we refer to patho, it's pathophysiology, pathology. You're looking at something that indicates a problem and explains a problem. And a pathogen is generally considered to be a problematic bacteria, one that is not good for you. Or a problematic organism. We have just a bunch of bacteria in our body. I mean, just millions upon millions of types of bacteria in our bodies and on our bodies. Bacteria are single-celled microorganisms that can be either helpful or harmful. Mostly they're helpful, the ones found in our bodies, and they help prevent an overgrowth of other kinds of conditions. We will be looking at various fungi. A fungus is sort of looked at as a plant-like structure. It doesn't have any roots or leaves. It just sort of floats through the air and lands where it will. And if a fungus starts to grow in and on our bodies, many times our good bacteria will take care of it. But if we're immune compromised or susceptible to this particular fungus, we can end up with skin rashes and then infections internally. Viruses are small agents that very, very tiny, much, much tinier than bacteria. They're parasites in and of themselves in that they can only replicate inside a living cell. They basically are introduced to the body. Many times viruses are destroyed before we even knew they were there, but if they gain entry to a cell, then they can begin to reproduce and to cause illness. But they can't do that without a living cell. A bacteria is alive wherever it is. Viruses are infectious agents, but they're not really functional until they get into a cell. So we're going to be talking about a lot of antimicrobials, drugs that work against various pathogens. So here's a picture of some normal bacteria found in the intestine. Not too awful looking. We are loaded with it, and it's essential to our digestion, to our immune system, to proper functioning. And we know, those of you who work in facilities, the problems that can arise when the beneficial bacteria are killed inside the intestine. Here's some bacteria in untreated water. They look relatively harmless, but if you were to drink that water, they probably would come back to bite you. This is a virus, and you can see viruses many times have protrusions stick out all over the cells, and that helps them latch onto a particular cell. This is a flu virus, and you can see how those little parts that protrude, they float into your nose, and they just, kind of lap right into a cell. Viruses were not able to be found until we had electron microscopes, and that wasn't available until, I know that they could not see viruses during the time of the 1918 worldwide flu epidemic, because they saw other things, mistook it for bacteria, weren't really sure what they were dealing with. Now, fortunately, since the invention of the electron microscope, we can see viruses and just see how they take hold. Human papilloma virus looks awfully pretty, but can do some devastating work, from asymptomatic infection to cancers of the genitals, mouth and throat, GI tract, just really, really nasty. Fungus spores, they just kind of float through the air. Most of them are harmless, but occasionally they can infect humans. Mushrooms are a fungus. You may not like mushrooms. I personally love them, can't get enough of them, and they're very good for you as long as you don't, eat a poisoned one. But they grow on plants or in the ground. Many of them are edible, some of them, not so much. But this is basically a fungus, pretty harmless. All right, so we're going to be talking about broad spectrum antibiotics and narrow spectrum antibiotics, and the definitions are found on page 67. I cannot urge you highly enough to read the introductory materials at the beginning of your chapter. Very, very important if you're going to understand how these drugs work later. So the first pages before they begin to talk about the specific antibiotics, make sure you read that, and make sure you read what's in the ATI book as well.